This meeting is now called to order. It is June 21st, 2023, and the time is 6:32 p.m. Our mission is to provide a safe and caring climate and culture in which we engage, inspire, educate, prepare, and empower all learners in partnership with their surrounding community to be successful in today's and tomorrow's society. Mr. Dorholt, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And then when you're ready, can you please call roll?
Scott Andresen,
Here.
Natalie Copeland,
Here.
Al Dahlgren,
Here.
Zach Dorholt is here, Shannon Haas,
Here.
Monica Segura Swartz is not here yet, and Heather Weems.
Here.
And the following cabinet members and staff are present at the District Administration Office. Superintendent Dr. Lori Putnam, Assistant Superintendent of Secondary Education Kay Nelson, Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Education Dr. Mike Rivard, Executive Director of Finance and Business Services Amy Scalarud, Director of Innovation and Instructional Technology Ryan Cox, Executive Director of Operations Gary Ganji, Media Technicians Paul Novak and Gordy Scott, and custodian on site is Evan Voss. The following cabinet members and staff are virtually present. Director of Equity Services, Ayan Omar. Executive Director of Human Resources and Labor Relations, Tracy Flynn-Bowe. Executive Assistant, Jan McGuire.
Thank you. Next, I'm looking for a motion to approve tonight's Board of Education meeting agenda.
So move.
And do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion by Scott and a second by Al. Zach, can you please call vote?
And Shannon Haas.
Yes.
Heather Weems.
Yes.
Scott Andresen.
Yes.
Natalie Copeland.
Yes.
Al Dahlgren.
Yes.
Zach Dorholtz, yes.
Thank you. Next is the consent agenda. The consent agenda consists of non-controversial items that the board adopts routinely without debate. Any single member may remove an item from the consent agenda by requesting removal at the time the consent agenda is moved for adoption. On tonight's consent agenda, item A, approval of minutes from May 3rd, 2023 and May 17, 2023. Item B, approval of bills and other financial transactions in the grand total amount of $3,983,757.03. Item C, approval of personnel staff changes. Item D, acceptance of grant awards and donations. Item E, update population base for community education funding. Item F, Oak Hill HVAC project change orders totaling $4,084.76. Item G, Discovery HVAC project change orders totaling $4,084.76. And item H, Apollo HVAC project change orders in the amount of credit $13,064 even. Does any board member wish to remove an item from the consent agenda as read? Okay, seeing no removal, looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So move.
And do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion by Scott, a second by Heather. Zach, can you please call vote?
Heather Weems.
Yes.
Scott Andresen.
Yes.
Natalie Copeland.
Yes.
Al Dahlgren.
Yes.
Zach Dorholtz, yes. Shannon Haas.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, next we moving to informational items. We have one information item tonight. It's the 10-year-long facilities maintenance plan. Amy Scalarud, Executive Director of Finance and Business Services, and Gary Ganji is here as well. Going to be able to answer some questions if we have them. Appreciate that. Welcome, Amy, for your first of many tonight.
Yeah, I've got a long list of agenda items here. So this is the first one. Good evening, Chair Haas, Superintendent Putnam, members of the board. This is our annual presentation of the 10-year long-term facilities maintenance plan. Just to recap, so that everyone's aware, if it would work for me. So the funding formula for the long-term facilities maintenance, which we commonly refer to as LTFM, program is set by the legislature. Revenue comes from two sources, levy and aid, with the majority of that coming in the form of levy. And the current LTFM program a number of years ago replaced the previous alternative facilities, deferred maintenance, health and safety programs. So sometimes we'll hear about those funding sources, and this is really what's replaced those. There is a number of allowable uses. So the health and safety allowable uses that existed in the old statute regarding health and safety are still allowable in the new LTFM program. Increasing school accessibility is an allowable expense. And then the majority of our budget goes to that next bucket, which is eligible projects necessary to prevent further erosion of facilities, which is somewhat of a broad term, but essentially means repairing and replacing your existing. It doesn't allow for new construction. It doesn't allow for remodeling. You can't add square footage, and it has to be in a district-owned facility. Now, the only caveat to the no new construction or remodeling is one change that actually came out of this last legislative session. So there is now, starting in fiscal year 25, which is the budget we're looking at tonight, an allowable use of LTFM funds to remodel or construct single-user gender-neutral restroom facilities. And so you'll see we've identified within the plan some funds to do some of those projects. That is now the one exception to that remodeling rule. As we look at the total 24-25 LTFM budget, there's really two components of the budget. There's the annual expenditure budget, which is set at $8 million for 24-25. That is the same as what we had in 2020 that we have in the upcoming year for 23-24. So there's no change there. And then there's additional LTFM revenue that comes in to the debt service fund to cover the principal and interest payments on any debt that has been issued to fund LTFM projects. So for the budget we're looking at tonight, there's an additional $3,922,000 to cover existing debt payments. Those are on the issuances from 2015 and 2022, which were issued for HVAC projects. And then you'll see that third line would be the new debt service payment on the $15 million that was presented in June and is proposed and is on the agenda this evening related to additional LTFM improvements for Apollo. So with those three, that would bring the total proposed budget to just over $13 million for the year. Again, this is not an action item tonight. This is the preliminary review, and the actual approval of this LTFM plan would come to the board in July, and it's required to be sent to MDE by the end of July. Then every year we also run through how the $8 million of annual expenditures breaks down and what the proposed spending for that is. And so you'll see there's two pieces that are really picking up a large portion of the budget for the year, with Apollo roofing one of them. If you may recall, we are doing the B-wing roofing now. However, we only were able to do about a third of it based on budget, as we were balancing the other projects that needed to be done this year and the HVAC projects. And so a portion of that got moved to next summer and was already planned and slated to be part of this budget. We'll talk about A-wing in a little bit when we talk about the potential use of the bond money if approved, but this is for the completion of B-wing. And then a large number there for those restroom improvements at North and South. A few other things that we'll just point out that are building specific. We do have a number of buildings that are in need of window replacement. All of these items being highlighted and being brought forward as proposed projects based on that 10-year plan that we had done a number of years ago, particularly with Talahi, Discovery, and Oak Hill. Those windows are original. They're single pane, and so that was identified as a priority in that plan to replace those, and we should see some energy efficiency coming from that as well. And then we do also always have things that come up. And so there's a number of areas where we set aside sort of district-wide allocations, particularly when we look at plumbing and HVAC and concrete repairs and some of those things. We don't know when a condensing unit or some sort of piece of equipment is going to go out and need to be replaced. And so those are really set aside to make sure that we have funding available and that we're not overspending our annual LTFM budget when unexpected things come up. And then there's always annual allocations for flooring and painting. Those, in terms of what buildings we look at, will be identified as we get closer to the projects for that summer. And then there is a little bit still unallocated. Are there any questions on the annual LTFM plan?
And just before we get into questions, I just want the record to show that Monica Segura Schwartz is currently present. Go ahead. Oh, no, did we have questions? Okay, Al, then Monica.
Amy, one of the things, tech is a few years old now, and the parking lots are still good, with the exception of some of the pavers. But the parking lots themselves, the hard parts of the parking lots are good, but I would think that those would be due for a seal coat soon. And I know I mentioned this a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, but I think that we should look into doing a real, like a heavy-duty seal coat like Aztec would do, where you put down the seal coat and then the rocks, and then it's a process, but it's like they do out on the highways, and it seals all of the cracks really good, and then those parking lots should be good for many years to come. Whereas if we let the cracks sit, they're gonna get moisture in them, and they're gonna freeze up and crack the pavement, and it'll break out, and then we'll be repaving those parking lots. But I don't know what the cost of that is. But I would think that tech should be on that schedule, because it would be about due now.
We look at the 10-year plan, ICS had identified payments, concrete, landscaping for tech in the 3 to 6 year window, so you're spot on there.
We're there.
Yep, we're there. We did start looking into that paving procedure that you had mentioned last summer after we'd had that discussion. If I recall, the pricing was a bit higher, but we'd want to take a look to see the longevity of that. It might be money worth spending, but we sure could get some more info on that.
Yeah, my gut tells me that it would be money worth spending.
Yeah,
If it wasn't, the highway department wouldn't do it to so many miles of roads, but
right.
To save those parking lots, if we can get them to last 20, 25 years instead of 10 to 12 or whatever, it's gonna pay off.
Right, and just so I want to make sure that we're talking the same thing, it's that procedure that was done out by Hennon's last summer and on County Road 75?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yep. I think it was Aztec that did both of them.
Thank you everybody for recognizing me that I'm here. I think that is for Gary, my questions. Are we going to get a presentation about the FDML 10-year plan? Do we get that presentation at some point?
So we don't have the external company do the 10-year plan report every year. We certainly have that, and that would have been presented in 2020 when that was done. The attached to the agenda is the expenditure spreadsheet that kind of lays out, not by building, but kind of by category where we see we might have roofing coming and those things. That's what gets submitted to MDE. We will likely, when we get a few more years down the road, want to have an external company come again and redo that 10-year plan, and then we would bring that to the board. But certainly if that's something that the board members, kind of want to see what's out there and hasn't been addressed, we can provide that information.
And how do we review that every year? Do we review only the things that we have every year, or we go around and look at things that need to be added?
Yeah, the list that Amy showed before, what we did is the last time this was refreshed was May of 2020. And so this is the document we work from as we take a look at where our highest needs are for the upcoming year for the LTFM dollars. So everything that you see is referenced from this document. Along with that, Amy had mentioned some undesignated just for emergencies that come up. We had a sinkhole last spring and, you know, we run into some of those. We always hold some of those dollars back for that.
Okay, thank you.
I think Monica's made a good request. I'd like to see the 10-year plan also.
Against middle.
Yeah.
I guess I'm confused in the same sense that I think Monica was. If, I thought we submitted to the state every 2 years.
We submit to the state every year, but what we submit to the state doesn't have the level of detail that I think Monica's referring to in terms of which buildings might need roofing. We compile that and condense that into saying, in 2024, we're expecting $2 million of roofing. So that's what's attached.
What are we submitting every 2 years?
We submit every year the
Every year.
spreadsheets that are attached to the board agenda. So there's a revenue projection, which is pretty
For
boilerplate.
this year?
It's got
next
10
year.
years. So if you open up the spreadsheets, there's a column for 10 different years worth of expenditure projections. It's not by building, right? MDE doesn't require it by building. They don't want that level of detail. So what we show is the immediate year, right? Because things change. We know that whatever we would put out there 10 years from now by building is certainly probably 10 years from now not going to look necessarily like it does, because things deteriorate faster or get prioritized in different order depending on, you know, how things are actually looking in our buildings and where those priorities are or things that come up. But it does show the 10 years of the expenditures, and that is what's due every year.
So where's that number coming from? That 10th year? So we added a new 10th year onto it this year.
Yes.
And that
so,
number is just a rough estimate, I would imagine.
right, if you look at the 10-year plan, we're using the 8 million because that's the current board-approved levy authority. And so we don't want to tell MDE that we plan to spend more than 8 million in any of those given years, because we don't want it to give some sort of false indication that the board is preliminarily in advance of future years approving levy increases. So if you look at those spreadsheets, it shows the 8 million for each of the 10 years. Certainly that could change, right? The board reserves the right in any given year to increase or decrease that annual amount.
But then if that company comes out and does our analysis of the buildings and says, this is what you need, say they come out and say, what you need is going to cost $12 million every year. When is that change made then to MDE?
So that would be, the board would have to do that at a subsequent year's LTFM plan. So the 10 years are basically the 10 years as of today. If next year at this time we said we want that 8 million to be 10 million per year, then we would update that next year when we do that 10-year plan. I think when we get to the next agenda item in terms of what we've done with previous bonds for HVAC and what is being proposed for the upcoming improvements for Apollo with some bonded options, we feel like we're at a pretty good point where we're not going to need 12 million a year, right? Where we are at is probably when we have a plan, now that we've done those, or will potentially have done those 2 bond issuances, we're sitting much more in line with where those 10-year projected expenditure needs were indicated in the 10-year plan. But again, that's where we maybe in a year or two want to have that refreshed and revisited and look at what might that look like with updated costs and reflecting what we have done to date, so that we know we don't get another 5 years down the road and we're significantly underfunding. So that will be a continual process. But we're not feeling like we were maybe 5 years ago when the plan first came out. And we'll actually be talking about that a little bit when we get to the bond piece. But when that plan was first issued, particularly with the HVAC projects and the significant amount of work just based on the size and the age of Apollo, we were certainly feeling when that report came out that there was not enough money to do what we needed. We're feeling like we're in a much better place now.
So please provide the 10-year plan.
I can email it out.
Any other questions? This comes back then next board meeting as an action item, is that correct?
Yes, so typically, it goes on consent for the, because
consent,
there isn't generally any changes. It's gone through Board Finance Committee, so typically that comes as a consent agenda item in July.
Okay, thank you. And not going anywhere, staying right there. Moving on to discussion and action items. First up is an action item, it's a doozer. It is a resolution stating the intention of the school board to issue general obligation bonds to finance projects included in the district's 10-year facility plan, covenanting and obligating the district to be bound by and to use the provisions of the Minnesota statutes, section 126C 55, to guarantee the payment of the principal and interest of the bonds. I hope I don't have to.
I am not going to state it again, and I didn't put the whole long title on my, on my presentation either. Ultimately, that rolls into a shortened version where we're looking at bringing forward for approval the issuance of alternative facility bonds related specifically to improvements at Apollo High School. So just a little bit of background, and we just sort of touched on this. In 2020, the district had that 10-year facilities assessment plan report completed, which outlined all of those necessary improvements over that 10-year period. And at the time, it was indicated that the needed improvements were in excess of what our annual LTFM revenue authority spread out over the total for 10 years was at the time. Also, since that report was issued, we also know construction costs have increased significantly. The biggest piece of that gap initially when we reviewed the 10-year plan was the large HVAC project needs that were still outstanding. So in April of 2022, the board did approve issuing $15 million in alternative facility bonds to complete the majority of the remaining HVAC projects. However, there's still significant needs at Apollo, and just the size and the age of the building, those needs are greater really than what can be done within our annual $8 million budget without not properly addressing the needs in other buildings. When we look at the 10-year plan that was released in 2020, the total costs over that 10-year period for Apollo alone were about $26 million. So that would take out of our annual needs a significant portion of those annual budgets to address. So just to outline, and this is a refresh, this is what Lori had gone over at the board meeting in June, but these are the immediate facility needs. Again, these align with what was indicated in that 10-year plan. The majority of those being finishes, so doorways, carpeting, seating, things like that are permanently affixed to the building, as well as roofing and HVAC. The roofing and HVAC needs alone that are left at Apollo are almost $6 million. And so again, to try to do those pieces would really tie up almost the majority of our annual budget to try to do that out of that annual levy budget.
Hey, Amy? Can you please teach me my ABCs again? I'm not, we always talk A, B, and C at Apollo, and I never remember which is which.
So if you're standing in front of the building on 44th, A is to your left. So A is where we have the gym and the auditorium and the cafeteria. B would be really that middle chunk with the library resource center and those two kind of hallways that sort of jut out with the learning neighborhoods. And then C wing encompasses where the old DAO used to be, and then the CTE area, the science wing. So again, if you're standing in front of the building outside, moving from left to right, A to the left, B in the middle, C on the right.
Where does A end? Is it at like the
So-
capsule or?
So A technically ends, if you're in the building, there's that hallway between guidance and kind of where the media center sort of starts. That's technically where A wing ends. B wing picks up right past the fire doors, so they align with the fire doors. So if you're familiar with the building, as you're in there, each wing is separated by 2 sets of, giant metal fire doors. That's your breaks between A, B, and C. So again, not going to go over all of this in detail because that was presented at the June meeting, but just wanted to provide a refresher or for anybody who hasn't been part of that meeting as to what the 15 million is primarily being allocated to. Again, that is administration's recommendation, is to issue the 15 million in alternative facilities bonds to cover these projects. Those projects will be completed in the summer of 2024. And in terms of funding impact, that bond would result in a in a principal and interest payment of about $1,150,000. That's pretty close to where we were at with the principal and interest payment on the issuance that was approved last year. Not surprising, since it's the same amount of debt. This would be included, again, in the fiscal 25 LTFM plan that would be approved in July. Once that plan is approved by the board, it gets submitted to MDE for approval, and then the bonding plan also gets submitted to the Commissioner of the Department of Education for approval. And then once those 2 approvals have been received, then the district would move forward with the issuance. The levy would be part of the proposed levy that the board would first see in September and would approve in December. And any tax impact would be for taxes payable in calendar year 2024. And we're estimating that that tax impact would be about $25 per year on a $250,000 home. And we're looking at, in terms of the total levy, that would be about a 3.5% increase. Comparatively, last year, the levy that the board approved was a 5.1% total increase. So our preliminary projection, knowing that there's a lot of things that impact the levy, that could go up, that could go down. We don't have a lot of control over other parts of the levy. A lot of it is enrollment driven, driven by other factors like unemployment, but we wouldn't expect it to deviate from that significantly.
Amy, when you say 3.5% increase, is that a 3.5% increase on the LTFM levy, 3.5 on the school levy, or 3.5 on their tax levy?
3.5% on the total dollar amount that the district levies. So that 3.5% doesn't equate to a 3.5% increase in tax. The way school districts levy, we levy a set dollar amount, and then that gets spread across all taxpayers based on the value of their property. So unlike a city or a county that sets a tax rate, that would automatically, as property values increase, result in additional revenue. That's not the same for us as a district. Actually, if we look at where we've been over a 5-year period, our tax rate, if we say the rate that we're charging, we convert it to a rate, we don't set a rate, it's actually gone down about 5%.
But it wouldn't be a 3.5% increase to property taxes. It would be a 3.5% increase to the school portion of their property tax rate.
It's 3.5% increase on the dollar amount we're levying. How that converts to the percent depends on what happens with valuations, but certainly it would be a minimal tax impact, right around or less than, even than what the board has approved for levies the last 2 levy cycles. And that is all I have, unless there are questions.
Monica?
Why is this a resolution and not a motion?
So it has to be a resolution based on the bond law for moving forward with next steps on going to market for a bond issuance. It's a legal requirement that it has to be approved by resolution. And so this is really, if you recall from past bonds, bonds really have a 2-step approval process. This is we call it a parameters resolution. It's the school board expressing their intent to move forward subject to those other approvals that we just talked about, the approval of the plan and the approval of the commissioner. Once the bonds are actually issued, there's a final resolution that comes forward for approval. We would expect that to be in September. So there's always 2 resolutions that have to be approved with every bond that the board issues.
Al?
Madam Chair, I would move the resolution stating the intention of the school board to issue general obligation bonds to finance projects included in the district's 10-year facility plan, covenanting and obligating the district to be bound by and to use the provisions of the Minnesota statute, section 126C.55, to guarantee payment of the principal and interest on the bonds.
I have a motion by Al and a second by Scott. Any further discussion? Okay, Zach, can you call vote?
Shannon Haas,
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz, Heather Weems,
Yes.
Scott Andresen,
Yes.
Natalie Copeland,
Yes.
Al Dahlgren,
Yes.
and Zach Dorholt is yes.
All right, thanks for that. And continuing here, moving along here, we have the approval of the 2022-2023 revised budget. Again, Amy Scalarud, Executive Director of Finance and Business Services.
So this is all a refresh. Now, it's been a while. The board saw the preliminary budget in May this year, but I'm not going to go through everything in detail. We'll just sort of recap the highlights. As it relates to 2022-23, you can see on the screen, this is also in the board packet, we are showing both what the original budget was, what we have for adjustments, and then what the revised budget is that the board is approving this evening. So you'll see in the general fund, both within general operations and operating capital, we have some pretty significant increases to the revenue budget. You'll see corresponding increases to the expenditure budget in those same funds in a minute. Those primarily relate to changes from what was estimated in various grants, and some of that is timing of expenditures, with the most significant portion of that being ESSER funds and ECF funds, those COVID relief funds, in terms of adjusting those for how much was being spent each year. In food service fund, we don't typically see a large amount of budget adjustments in food service fund. However, last year, USDA had some one-time increased rates for the reimbursement that wouldn't have been part of the original budget. Those weren't released until July. And so those were about 30 cents additional as part of a special relief bill. We don't know yet if those will continue for next year. We suspect not. We haven't, the original budget doesn't reflect those additional funds, but we did do a budget amendment to recognize that additional revenue that we didn't know of at the time the budget was approved. And then some minor adjustments to community ed, again, primarily related to some grants and various donations that were received there. On the expenditure side, again, you'll see that the general fund, those adjustments very much mirroring what we see on the revenue side. And then food service and community service have similar adjustments, although larger, due to some intentional spend down of fund balance. You'll see food service in a little bit. I'll click to the slide that shows ending fund balance. We've built up a significant fund balance in food service, and so we're intentionally trying to spend that back down to MDE's recommended threshold. They don't like to see the balance in that fund get to be more than 3 months worth of expenditures, and so that's why you'll see that we had a larger budget for expenditures compared to revenue in that fund, which is not something we would typically see. And then the building construction fund, it's just based on timing, the timing of which fiscal year those HVAC improvements are hitting. The time we do the budget, we don't know how far they're going to be when we get to that June cutoff. And so that's to adjust for that. And then a slight or a small adjustment in debt service to reflect the first interest payment on that new bond issuance that we just had talked about from 2022. The budget had been done prior to that bond issuance being finalized and that principal and interest schedule being completed. So then here's a quick snapshot of the 2022-23 revised budget and where each of those funds started the year in terms of fund balance and where we're projecting to end the year. And you can see all of those funds having healthy fund balances projected at the end of 22-23. Any questions on the revised budget?
And the general, we had both an increase of around 5 million and an expenditure of around 5 million. Where did the money come from?
So the majority of that, again, a lot of that is timing in terms of the ESSER funds. So a big portion, or not a big portion, but we had that large HVAC project. And so part of that ended up timing in terms of which fiscal year the work was being completed. We didn't, at the time the budget was done, know that we were going to have ECF funds again. Our title allocations quite often come in more than we expect, because when we budget conservatively, and we don't have those actual information. So it's coming from a variety of places, but most of it is really just timing in terms of some things that maybe we had planned to buy, like furniture or something like that, out of ESSER funds in 2022. But if an order was delayed, that might now need to shift until 2023. So a lot of that just has timing issues between what ends up happening in June versus July and August.
I can see that certainly with the building construction. I was a little confused on the general fund. Now we're going to be losing some of this ESSER funds probably next year. How's that going to impact us?
So when we get to the 23-24 budget, we have one more year of ESSER funds. So the budget that the board will approve tonight for next school year includes 1 year of ESSER funds. There are still a number of positions and resources and supports that are ESSER funded next year. And the district will likely be recommending that we continue the majority of those. Obviously, we'll review and make sure that they're all things that are providing value and impact. But that would be items that we would be recommending from the new money from the state. And we'll be bringing more information to the board on that, tentatively planned for July, to have a presentation on the new money coming out of the legislative session, and what that looks like and how that ties in with the previously supported ESSER items.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? If not, looking for a motion.
I move that we approve the 22-23 revised budget.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second?
I have a motion by Scott, a second by Heather. Any further discussion? Zach, can you call vote?
Monica Segura Schwartz,
Yes.
Heather Weems, Scott Andresen,
Yes.
Natalie Copeland,
Yes.
Al Dahlgren,
Yes.
Zach Dorholt is a yes, Shannon Hawes.
Yes. All right, okay, one more. Thanks for hanging in there. We have the approval of the 2023-2024 budget.
Okay, first we will look at the general fund. And again, not going to go line by line, but I'll just highlight a few things. The first thing I want to point out is that this budget does not include the new money from the state, just based on the timing of the legislative session and the fact that budgets have to be approved by boards by the end of June. We have done the budget without the revenue or anything on the expense side either. We will be bringing forward, again, like I just said, some information generally to the board in July about how much that new money is and what that's coming from. And then we'll bring a formal sort of budget revision mid-year, probably in early fall, in terms of how those funds might get incorporated into the expenditure budget for next year. We do have still about $4 million in either salary or instructional costs, that curriculum costs for various things that are ESSER funded within this budget. So you'll still see a pretty significant amount of federal revenue compared to what we would see kind of pre-COVID or pre-COVID relief funding. Again, this is the last year of those funds, so we'll see that drop back down to a more normal amount, probably closer to 10 to 12 million as we move into the following year. However, again, we have some new money from the state, and so we'll be seeing that those state revenues increase to kind of offset that. Total general fund budget, about third line there from the bottom. We always budget essentially a break even. We are not recommending right now approving any spending out of general fund reserve balances. And so you see bottom line in the general fund there, just over 44,000 surplus for the year. In our special revenue funds, we sort of have the opposite story. We've built up some pretty significant reserves above what MDE would generally recommend in terms of those balances. And so you do see intentional deficit spend downs in our two special revenue funds, which are food service and community education. Those are for one-time purchases out of those reserves. So equipment or other one-time improvements. And you can see even after those deficit spends, both of those funds having very healthy fund balances projected at the end of this upcoming year. The next two budgets are our capital projects and our debt service fund. What's being shown in the capital projects fund is the remaining projected work for the $15 million of HVAC improvements. Again, this budget doesn't reflect anything that would be coming in or potentially spent next June on what was just approved. That would be part of a future amendment to approve those bond proceeds and the associated spending. And then the debt service fund, again, is set by statute. The reason we see that large deficit spend in debt service is because we refunded the 2017 bond for the tech high school. However, when we refunded it, the original bond wasn't callable yet. So we have two sitting out there, and the proceeds are sufficient from the refunding to pay the principal and interest on the second debt issuance, if you will. And so it looks like we're deficit spending, but we obviously have a large fund balance of about $75 million that is sitting there and will cover that overage as well as that payoff balance when that bond is legally allowed to be called and paid off, which is, I believe, in 2027. And then we have three internal service funds for insurance. Again, healthy balances in all three of those funds, and so nothing really out of the ordinary or unusual to point out there. Any questions on the 23-24 budget?
Go ahead.
My questions would be around when we would see the revisions. When you say late, you said late July. Is that correct? Late July?
So July, we wouldn't be
Revised
looking at
budget?
the board making any sort of action. We would be bringing some general information about the new revenue. And then we would, because we won't be at a point likely administratively to have a full comprehensive plan on the proposed spending by July. So we would probably look at August or September, depending on that for approval of the expenditure piece.
Well, my question revolves around the fact that we start spending it in July, correct? This budget period starts in July?
We start spending anything we'd be proposing to add. So right now, because we have a significant portion already ESSER funded, those are in the budget. Most of what we'd be looking at in terms of allocation for new spending would be starting in fiscal '25 and would be part of that budget. So as of right now, there isn't anything pressing that we'd be looking at starting to spend that we would need a formal budget revision in July. If we do have things that would come up or we're proposing, then we would bring those to the board as a specific action item to approve spending for that item versus bringing it as a part of the whole comprehensive plan. And we may have some things, we know that there's some agenda items coming up on future board meetings that we may be looking at utilizing some of that funding for. But in terms of a comprehensive budget revision, we would want to wait till we have a plan for kind of the whole portion of new money. Some of that will also be dependent on, again, potentially, we know that historically, the formula increase in a portion of our new money goes to bargaining, and so that will be dependent upon the closed session. We typically don't bring a formal amendment outside of the bargaining budget. We certainly could, because that meeting, the board is allocating the funds for that. However, we certainly could roll that in. We'll talk about that at Board Finance in July in terms of what we want that to look like, just given that this is a year where we have significantly more money than we typically would when it's just the formula increase and the bargaining budget. It's a lot more complex this year.
We usually get a preliminary budget book, but not yet. Is that right? We're kind of approving next year's budget without seeing a preliminary.
So the preliminary was in May. So at the first board meeting in May, we had the book and we went through page by page. So this is the final approval that relates to that. Normally, there's not this amount of distance between the two. It's usually back-to-back meetings. But we had some unique circumstances this year where we had to bring it early. And that full budget book is attached to the board agenda as well. That same book that you would have seen in May there was one page that wasn't updated in May yet with the new formula increase per pupil amount. That has been updated, so what's attached now is the final version.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, this is another action item looking for approval, a motion to approve the 2023-2024 budget.
I move we approve the 23-24 budget.
Okay, do I have a second? I have a motion by Scott and a second by Zach. Any further discussion? Zach, will you please call vote?
Yes. Natalie Copeland,
Yes.
Val Dahlgren,
Yes.
Zach Dorhol, say yes. Shannon Haas.
Yes.
Monica Shigeru Schwartz,
Yes.
Heather Weems,
Yes.
Scott Andresen.
Yes.
Thank you, Amy. Next up, we have the approval of student and family handbooks for the 23-24 school year. Presenting tonight is Dr. Mike Rivard, Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Education, and Kay Nelson, Assistant Superintendent of Secondary Education.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Hawes, Dr. Putnam, and members of the board. Nelson and I are excited to bring administration's recommendation for the Student and Family Handbook for the 2023-24 school year for you tonight for approval. We'll not be reviewing the entire Student and Family Handbook because it does go on for great lengths, but we will be highlighting some changes for next year. So since sharing the student handbook last week with some board members for your review and feedback, Kay and I did spend some time in 1 or 2 MSBA trainings and also reviewed new legislation that necessitates their inclusion in next year's handbooks. We are planning to update other board policies because of the new legislation. However, this evening, we first need to go to and highlight new legislation that directly impacted our handbook in 2 areas. These 2 items are required to be included in our student and family handbooks for this coming year. First, in the handbooks, we added additional language related to the bullying section of the handbook. Bullying now must include, and this again is due to statute, information regarding the definition of bullying that is malicious and sadistic conduct, which creates a hostile learning environment. The remainder of those statements are included on page 15 for your review. The second area of the new legislation that is required now is related to suicide prevention and crisis assistance. In addition to some of the national phone numbers that are included in the student handbook now, as per state statute, we're fortunate to have the 4-county crisis response team, and we also have that information included in the student handbooks. So those 2 areas are both required now due to state statute. Okay, this is yours.
I thought we had a question.
Oh, I'm
so-
sorry.
Yeah, if I can
Absolutely.
ask in the middle. It's just about that definition of bullying that is a bit too much for me. Like this malicious and sadistic part. And I know that we cannot really do anything about it, but how do we get to? So for me, it's putting a higher standard in what bullying is or is not. Is that kind of the question that I have? Is that a higher standard? I mean, do you have to be how do you prove malicious intent in a kid?
Which is a great and interesting question, and bullying usually involves a pretty significant investigation that we do when those do happen. The language is defined now through state statute and gives some specificity about what that means. And I think the interesting part that we saw is there's 2 or 3 components that are required to be within student handbooks. So oftentimes this would just live in language in Board Policy 514 regarding bullying, but now there is a requirement that we include this language due to state statute in our handbooks. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but
Yes. So yes, you are, and yes, I got it. This is the handbook, and it's not the policy about bullying. And we're talking about what it has to say in the handbook, and we're not talking about policy. But you also said that, but you mentioned this definition that is made by the state and that is going to affect policy. So I guess my question is more in regards to policy than the specific handbook. And maybe I'm too early to ask for this question, but is this definition changing, making us revise the policy to see if we need to have, this is different than the standard that we have for bullying, isn't it?
certainly, and the model policy for Board Policy 506 includes some of this language, which we'll be looking at during the first August board meeting and reviewing at that time. And it also could impact Board Policy 514, which is our bullying prohibition policy. It's going to add to or supplement the information. I don't expect that we'll be taking information away from how we define bullying, but when we added cyberbullying to the bullying definition, we're now adding a little bit more. And I see Dr. Putnam looking at me.
I think Tracy also wants to add in, since we're starting to wander into some of the legal
Certainly.
definitions. So is it okay if she adds on to you,
Absolutely.
Dr. Rivard? Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Tracy.
514 that will include this definition. The definition is specific. It says it's conduct that creates a hostile learning environment by acting with intent to cause harm, by intentionally injuring another without just cause or reason, or engaging in extreme or excessive cruelty or delighting in cruelty. And the legislature, apparently there were long debates about this addition, and the legislature, I think, heard enough testimony from students across the state that had experienced this level of harm in their schools that they felt it was important to name that in the bullying policy. So it's not going to change the way we administer the bullying policy, but it will call out specifically this level of behavior and make it very clear that it can't happen inside of our schools.
Are we getting an MSBA new policy revision then in July?
That would be correct. We'll be going over 506 during the June 28th meeting.
This new stuff from MSBA will include the state statute requirements.
To be presented to the committee, yes, and then for your guys' thoughts and approval before we bring it to the full board.
Thank you.
So are we anticipating that we have, because this standard seems to be higher for me, and I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure, but seems to be that it's a higher standard. I'm wondering, in the policy that we have for bullying right now, would it be cases that we currently consider as bullying that may no longer be considered as bullying?
No, this is adding a different layer, a different way of looking at bullying. The old language still is part of our bullying policy and our bullying in the student handbook. This is an additional information as part of how bullying is defined. So similar to with cyberbullying, when we added that, the old language relating to what bullying is still lives there, but now they added cyberbullying. This is adding more information, to Tracy's point, about some of the experiences that children were having across our state, and that was legislated on.
Okay, so the changing or the revisions in the policy will not affect the handbook?
No, this is additional information on top of what currently is in there.
Right, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm going to go back for Kay.
I get a little confused on things, but this change was made in statute. Was it made in the statute of the Safe and Supportive Schools Act? Or, because the bullying policy that we have was developed or was written almost word for word based on the Safe and Supportive Schools Act.
Right
And
now,
is that,
it's included in Chapter 55 of the policy that was brought forward from the legislature. I'll have to check on your question for the safe, because I know that lives in Chapter 55, but I would need to go through.
okay.
And I could
And
get
a
the
lot of
answer to
that is procedure, I think, but I don't know.
I can look back, Al.
That's a very complicated policy.
Be glad to check, though.
Tracy, were you chiming in there? Go ahead.
Yeah, I will probably agree with you, but I think when the MSBA gave us information last week about it, they were suggesting, I don't think it's, I'm getting feedback, sorry.
She's making up for us not being able to hear her before.
I think they were, whoops, okay.
Okay, try it again. Tracy?
Try it again, Tracy.
I think Mike correct that it was, it's in the education bill, but it in terms of where to include it, I don't believe it's been included in the Safe and Supportive Schools Act. And that's why the MSBA was looking for which policy it would be most appropriately added to, that we have to add the language to a policy, but not to a specific policy. And it makes complete sense that it would live in the Belaine policy. I think with that level, that next level of kind of, intentional cruelty may be an anchor for is for more serious kinds of consequencing for students that engage in that level of intentional bullying activity. So we'll be getting all of those recommendations shortly from MSBA in those policies, but I would expect it to come forward as part of the Belaine policy. Again, not changing the underlying provisions of the Safe and Supportive School Act or our current Belaine policy, but I think they just wanted it explicitly named and then referenced in the handbook so that if families or students feel like this kind of conduct is happening, that they know this is something that they should complain about to school and expect support with.
And for the board, if it does help, this is the student and family handbook up on the screen. And where you see this new language living, so all this language that was here before is similar to what we had last year and how we define bullying. And as you get down past cyberbullying, we included the information regarding malicious and sadistic conduct in the bullying defined statement. So none of this information is different than what you would have seen last year, except for that last sentence where it starts with bullying also includes malicious and sadistic conduct. While we know that the policy will have some updating and some more specific information, within our handbooks, we wanted to make sure that it lives there, but we didn't pull anything else out. We just added this statement. Any other
Thank you.
questions about that particular one?
Ready to move on?
Okay, and so just highlighting, again, you guys saw these in June, the secondary changes, so this is just a review, but just and a reminder that we updated the personal electronic devices, the way for the day for our middle schools and backpack usage. And then for the high schools, we updated the parking information based on your action last month or earlier in June to reduce those parking fees.
Couple of questions that came up from an email I got from a family. What is the policy for staff and teachers around, I mean, away for the day related to cell phones and media? I mean, is there an expectation for staff and personnel in the classroom and that sort of thing?
I think the expectation is that they're not on their personal devices while they are providing instruction and working with children. It's not part of the student handbook, but
Well, obviously, it's not part of the student handbook, but that's discussed in.
those
as an
expectations,
expectation.
yes, are laid out for staff. We have staff expectations laid out for them.
And then there was a question from the same family about particularly young girls and menstruation and that sort of thing with the backpack. Can you just clarify for me, like, can they carry purses? Can they, what's considered a backpack and thoughtful about different situations for, well, any student, but particularly in
And
that
I
situation?
think that's one of the reasons why we added that students would be able to have a trapper keeper, because those they come with a pouch, a zippered pouch for personal items that they might need.
Natalie?
Am I also remembering correctly that in the legislature, they're allocating money for those sort of products, menstrual products in the
Yes.
bathrooms as well? I mean, not for free, yeah. But I know people have their certain kind that they use, so that's a good question. Thank you.
Scott?
I like the no electronic devices in the middle schools. Could you tell me again why we're not doing it in the high schools?
I think the high schools feel like what the goal of a high school is to prepare our children to function in society, and part of that is that they have to learn responsible use of using electronic devices, and they feel that it's age appropriate in a high school to do that. The high schools do not report the same type of problems that we see in middle school, and so they didn't feel that a change was needed at this time.
Thank you for all the work that went into this. When you're reporting how you're attending these trainings and I imagine you started a long time ago and you're still busy to the end here, so thank you. So this is an action item, looking for approval of the student and family handbooks.
I move that we approve the student and family handbooks for elementary and secondary.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Zach, can you please call vote?
Al Dahlgren,
Yes.
Zach Dorholz, yes. Shannon Haas,
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz,
Yes.
Heather Weems,
Yes.
Scott Andresen,
Yes.
Natalie Copeland.
Yes.
Thanks. And sorry, I did, Jan takes the minutes, and that was a motion by Natalie and a second by Heather. Okay, moving on to a couple board policies. First up tonight, we have proposed revised board policy 805. It is the second reading, waste reduction and recycling, presented by Gary Ganji, Executive Director of Operations.
All right, good evening again. 805 is waste reduction and recycling. As you recall on first reading, when we went through it, the bulk of the changes are really around removing statutory references within the policy, and then just some revisions to some of the statutory references within the legal references. Were there any additional questions since the first reading? Great.
Okay. And staying right there, the other board policy for tonight is proposed revised board policy 806, crisis management policy, again, second reading.
Right, so this one, the changes really came out of our EPAC group, our advisory group of our community partners. Had to do with some language changes. We added some different topics to the procedures, such as shelter in place to align with our community language. Not a lot of changes there. At the first reading, the question was raised if within the references, we should be referencing any procedural books. I did go through a number of our policies. All of our references at the end of the policies are either legal references, statutory references, or MSBA model document references. There isn't anything to our policies, so, or excuse me, our procedures.
Thank you. Any questions or comments on that one? All right, thanks, Gary. That ends our discussion and action items for tonight. Next, we are moving on to the reports. We have the superintendent report. Lori Putnam.
Thank you, Chair Haas, members of the board. I'm excited to give the final superintendent report of my first year. So I do want to just start off by saying a sincere thank you to this board, to our cabinet team, and to our district team for a really tremendous year, and to our listening public who have been incredibly supportive, not just of me, but of the work that we are all collectively trying to do on behalf of our students in the greater St. Cloud area. So thank you to each and every one of you. I could not ask for better. Speaking of not being able to ask for better, I want to celebrate our communications team. Our communications department, they just won a statewide award from MINSPRA, which is the professional association for public relations, school public relations professionals. They won an award for the majorettes video. Those of you who watched it, you know it's quite a tearjerker. And so congratulations to them. We see their great work very often, and this was a wonderful opportunity for them to receive statewide recognition as well. I've been asked a little bit about, what do administrators do over the summer? And so I wanted to just take a moment and as to close out my final superintendent report for the year to just share a little bit about what's happening over the summer, because it's hard to know if you're not always in it. All of us at the cabinet level are working steadily throughout the summer. Each of us has, our own thing happening. So as you heard from Gary, we have a lot of facilities projects that are ongoing. Hiring used to be a cyclical process, and now it is a year-long process, virtually around the clock. Those of you who are in higher positions of needing to hire know. So our human resources team is busier than ever during the summer, but again, they do hire year-round. Our welcome center and our equity teams are very busy. They are out at Lake George. They are at Promise Neighborhood. They are really working to be embedded in the community so that we are making sure that we're continuing to serve our students, not just in summer school, but out in the community. And I want to take the opportunity to say that our grand opening for the Cop House, for being co-inhabitants or co-located at the Cop House, we've just selected August 1st. It'll coincide with National Night Out, so we'll be celebrating our event, though our equity team is staffing that throughout the summer, so families can stop in. We'll also have other things like our transportation department will be there, our nutrition departments will be there, activities teams will be there, the welcome center will be there, just to really try to show that partnership doesn't mean you always have to come to us. We're more than willing to go visit our families and our students where they are as well. Our principals do take off part of the summer in July, but most of them are in throughout, and they are either supporting summer school, planning for the year ahead, or they are, you will see them at Lake George. They've got booths throughout the summer. And then we continue to have professional development. I got to sit in on a beautiful professional learning opportunity for our future teachers for the Central Minnesota Virtual Academy, and they were incredibly excited with the work that Ryan and Katie Herbold are doing, being curious and being risk takers as they take on this new project. And it was really just so uplifting to be part of a very veteran teaching staff who was willing to say, I'm going to try something new, and to be they were so excited about it. It just really was inspiring. We had our kindergarten task force here this morning, and then we had all of our grade level leads in most recently, I believe it was last week, as our learning and teaching department continues to grab hold of these last days of June to prepare for the upcoming year. So we remain busy throughout the summer, and of course welcome any communication from our community or our students as they may need support over the summer months. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And then we have the Board of Education Standing Committee reports. I believe we have 2 of them. Board Finance and Audit Committee Chair Al Dahlgren.
Yep, Finance and Audit met, was it last Friday? Thursday or Friday, the 15th. Amy, Scott, Gary, and myself, Lori, and Monica were all present. The first item on the agenda we discussed was the fiscal year 25 long-term facilities maintenance plan, which we went through tonight, so I'm not going to go through that here. The second item on the agenda was a legislative funding update. Amy presented a brief summary of the new funding provided during the recent legislative session. An update will be presented to the board in July. So at our July meeting, we will get an update from Amy on that. The third item on the agenda was the McKinley addition. Amy handed out and reviewed drawings for 2 options for an addition at McKinley, along with estimated budget for each option. Both options are for 4 classrooms, storage, and additional restrooms. Option 1 includes 600 square foot classrooms, which would be adequate for the planned use of the space for next year. Option 2 takes into consideration that someday the school or those classrooms may be used for other programming, which may need larger classrooms, and has the classrooms at 850 square foot each. Option 2 is approximately $400,000 more than option 1. Administration recommends going with option 2 to provide future flexibility. Amy plans to submit the full $3.6 million plan to MDE to request permission to use ESSER funds to fund the project. The committee members agreed with bringing option 2 to the board for approval. If approved, the project would be done next summer, 2024. With the restroom renovations previously approved by the board, which were originally scheduled to be completed this summer, but had to be delayed because of not knowing what we were going to be doing with this and not knowing exactly what the codes were going to be if we were looking at adding on. So anyway, we said let's go with the larger classrooms, or plan on the larger classrooms, bring that forward to the board. And we'll still complete the other restroom projects, and then the addition of some additional restrooms in the new portion brings us up to code on restrooms within that building. And that was the end of the meeting.
Thank you. Scott?
At one time, there was talk of 4 to 6 classrooms, and yet we seem to be looking at 4. Any idea what happened to the idea of 6?
When we look at our current and forecasted need, we felt really confident that 4 would meet not only current need, but as I said, into the future. There are some additional spaces when this board sees the plans. I believe it comes forward in July. You will see what looks like 6, but those back spaces are more office space, which while classrooms are obviously our priority, sometimes we find that those office spaces become a premium if we aren't really thoughtful on the front end.
Okay. Thank you. And then Personnel Negotiations Committee Chair Monica Segarra-Schwartz.
Thank you. We met yesterday, June 20th. We had 4 items in the agenda. We talk about, first we talk about the 2023-2025 bargaining planning. Administration provided an overview of the plan for the closed session that we'll have tomorrow and establish a bargaining budget. The second, the administration reviewed the position changes related to the 2023-2024 leadership structure and the impact on position changes and pay changes in the non-representative exempt group. So that's preliminary to negotiations. The third point was the administration presented a preliminary report in non-licensed wage study report. The Gallagher Group will make a board presentation scheduled for August 2nd, so you will have a view of that in the board meeting. And the fourth thing that we reviewed was the superintendent evaluation process, and we are making recommendations to establish an annual review process of the superintendent, but based in a three-year cycle. That's a change from what we had been doing before. So we're looking at that 3-year cycle and how would that look like. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Okay. Next, we have future agenda items. July regular board meeting topics will include activities update and Minnesota State High School League Why We Play video, approval of the 23-24 Minnesota State High School League membership renewal, approval of the 23-24 Minnesota School Board Association membership renewal, approval of the 23-24 AMSD membership renewal, the health and dental insurance plan renewals and premiums for 23 and 24, McKinley facilities, and MSBA platform. At this time, does any board member wish to suggest an agenda item? Scott?
Yeah, several years ago, just before I came onto the board, Tracy made a really good presentation of job comparisons, like how can you compare a janitor and a cook? And I guess it was really quite understandable. I know I talked to her later about it. And we're coming up to this time of year where we're dealing with personnel again. It'd be nice if we could rehear that presentation.
I think you are in luck. Is that it is in one of the handouts that we'll be receiving tomorrow night. Is that correct? Did you?
Yeah.
When the labor experts come to talk to us about the wage study, they'll review the decision band method with the board that evening as well for the benefit of the public.
So you get to hear it twice. Ask and you shall receive. All right. Super. Okay. Moving on to a wonderful finish for, it's wonderful but sad finish for the night. Recognition of Superintendent Kay Nelson's retirement, presented by Lori Putnam.
So not only at my last superintendent report of the year, right, but Kay's last meeting of her time with us, and after a long and amazing career, I just wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you to Kay, both in person and to this public. And I hope it's okay that I share this. When I was trying to convince Kay that this was the right spot for her, she said, you know, I can't promise you how long I'll be there. And I said, that's okay. I will take anything I can get. It was very important for me coming into this new role to have somebody, while I had amazing Dr. Rivard, Kay has had decades of experience and leadership and is widely highly regarded across the state, and was able to bring a level of calm and experience that really anchored my first year. And I was reflecting actually with our former superintendent today, and saying to him how very grateful I am that you were here during this restructure, Kay, because you carried our learning and teaching team during some really hard times. And I don't know what we would have done without you. And so I, in addition to being professionally and personally grateful for what you did for me, what you did for this team can't be underestimated. So you have my heartfelt thanks and gratitude for an amazing year, and I will miss you. Our team will miss you.
So then I wanted to open it up to board members to say farewell to. So anybody care to start? Al?
I too, okay, will say thank you for coming the short little jaunt down the road from Sartell to help. Lori mentioned two things, and when I was thinking about what I would say, I was thinking the same words, and she said that she brought a level of calm and a level of experience into this district, and I know that you did because there were just no fires to put out this last year, and there's always fires to put out. So things were getting taken care of, and they were being taken care of in a timely fashion. And to step into a new district and to know exactly what to do and how to do those things, it takes a level of calm and it takes a level of experience, and I could see that in you. And I think you did a fantastic job for the short year that you were here, but I really appreciate everything you've done for us.
Guess what my first word I wrote down was? It's calm. And yet, you know, I really knew, I thought maybe you were shy at first, but then I saw some things you were passionate about, and I was like, okay, there's some fire there. I like it. But I put calm and intentional and celebratory. I think your secondary celebrations, that with the pictures and the videos, I could be partial because my kids were in it sometimes, but like, that's such a highlight. I know you have a lot to compete with little bitty preschoolers, but I really value teenagers as well. So thank you for being who you are and for celebrating our kids.
Okay, thank you so much for all what you have done for our district and for being here and for the hand that you're gonna lend us when you leave, because we're not letting you completely leave. I'm going to follow what Natalie was saying. The one thing that I think that I told you like the first or second time is that the standard for those presentations for the updates for the high schools were high because we were loving those little kids. And he always steals the show. But I gotta tell you that you did a wonderful job with that one, and you stamped to the bar and leaving a hard bar for high bar for the next person, for poor Jason, to see if he's hearing me. He's gonna have to put it up with those presentations. I did enjoy that a lot, and it shows a little bit of you and a little bit and a lot of how you care for the kids in the district. So thank you so much for your work, and I hope that you can relax and have fun and trips.
Obviously, this has all been new to me, so it's certainly been a learning experience, but I think maybe what I will recount, and probably goes along with the calmness comments, I know as a leader, you're only as strong as the people who are around you. And in a first year, but even in a 10th year, it matters, and the ability to empower those around you and to trust in their judgment, I think is so vitally important, and it enables the leader to be better. And I was in a one-on-one with Lori a month or two ago, and South went into shelter in place, of which was the first time that I've been in a one-on-one when that's happening. And I was actually surprised that she managed it, sent whatever messages she needed to, and then we went on with our one-on-one. And it was only half an hour long, so it's not as if this all happens, it takes a long time. But for her to be able to, we never know behind the scenes what happens and how teams work. You just don't know unless you're in the day-to-day. But what that demonstrated to me was the trust, and that trust is earned. And I think it's incredibly important, and obviously that trickles down to the staff that you work with and the kids who benefit through their or through their experience, and how the teachers see them every single day. So thank you.
Well, it's really good to have you here. I hope you just kind of hang around a little bit. I got to know you best in our board development, and I was kind of new to it. I was first time as being a chair on it. And yet your presentations for the policies were right on. And I appreciate that. And I understand that you're an expert in data practices requests too. And, you know, we don't hear about it, but that's good. You're doing your job. Thank you.
I'll second all of that. Once again, thanks for coming over from neighboring district. Appreciated that. And I always appreciated your quick responsivity. Is that a word? Quick response. All right, good. That would, I do more of my communication with emails and stuff, and it was awesome to just have those quick responses and connections. So enjoy whatever is next.
I agree with everything that was said. Kate, thank you very much. It was a fabulous year. Thank you for being here. Know that you impact us longer than 1 year. So you were here for 1 year, but you're leaving your gifts and your talents and your marks. And so thank you very much. Okay. Yeah.
I do want to thank you all for this opportunity. It has really been a privilege and an honor to be 7 years as a public educator here, and truly from the leadership to every staff member and every student, there's amazing things happening here, and I'm very proud to be part of our community, and being part of the staff for a second time was really a wonderful experience. So thank you so much for all of your support and helping me learn and grow again this year. And I'm looking forward to my continued work with some of the new incoming leaders.
Thank you. Okay. Great night. So looking to adjourn tonight's board meeting. And do I have a second?
Second.
So I have a motion by Natalie, a second by Al. All in favor, say aye. Opposed? Excellent. Meeting is adjourned. It is 7:58 p.m. Thank you for watching, and we will not be back until July 19th. Have a good night.